Right, my name's Geoffrey Buxton. I live at Highgate Farm, Rudyard. I've lived there for 65 years. I was born at Rudyard Green, my grandfather's place. I lived for the first 4 years there until we had a house built, and I've lived in it ever since it was built in February 1937. And of course the trains ran up and down until Dr. Beechin decided otherwise. And we always used to work down the fields. We never had a watch in the days. Grandad would send us down either weeding or thinning turnips, whatever, and we used to watch the train. By the time, you see, 4:10 train, there used to come one up at 10 to, and then we'd say, oh, we won't be long, 4:10, oh, it's time, knock off, go fetch cows.
Most of the local farmers are dairy farmers and sold milk to London, I think. We did anyway. And the 7:10 train every evening used to come, and the milk floats, which were driven by the horses, used to almost be like chariot races. They used to charge like mad down from the village and surrounding farms just in time to get their milk churns onto the train.
I could hear those trains from home taking off, and about 3 shunts, you could hear it glangling through the tunnel into Leek. And I used to come down on Saturday nights, you know, 7 o'clock. The Sentinels always came. Mrs. Lees was the paper lady then. Her son Vic, still very prominent, lives in the village now. And I used to bite down, and they used to wait, and the train had come in with the Sentinels on, and off it would go, chuff, chuff, you could hear it going all the way to Rushton. But you do miss those things, the things that'll never return, but they're certainly very happy memories for me.
Well, my name's William Brooks. I've got a middle name, and my middle name is Walker because my maternal grandparents were brewers in Leek. But I was born at Willgate Farm, which is just about 100 yards away from this lake head, or 300. I was born there in 1924. My uncle was killed in the First World War. He was a subaltern with the North Staff Regiment and was killed on the first day of the German advance in 1918, March the 21st. I remember the Second World War starting, and I was on a bike going to Leek, the town north of Rudyard, and I can remember September the 3rd in late morning. Why on earth I was cycling to Leek, I do not know, but it was a very somber time. We felt strangely separated from what was going on in Europe.
There was a lot of training exercises took place in the west of England because the airfields where the operations over Germany took place were all in the east on the flatter ground, so they used our side for training flights. And this particular Stirling bomber, their training exercise was to photograph the Menai Bridge by moonlight. And something went wrong with the engines. It was seen on fire going over Leek. It crashed into the hillside near to Cliff Park, which used to be a youth hostel. At the time, there was an American camp down on the lakeside. They were learning to drive their vehicles through water for D-Day, and they had a tent camp and a bridge out into about, 3 foot of water. They had metal tracking on the bed of the lake, and they drove with their engines with air intakes and exhaust pipes up in the air, and they learned how to come off the landing craft at D-Day. Anyway, that particular night, my father woke up, and my mother woke up, and my mother said, "It's raining in the attic." And my father got out of bed and he said, "It isn't right." The ammunition was going off, pop, 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 pop. And he said, "It isn't raining in the attic, come and look." And I think then they called me, and there was all this huge fire, shouts, The American camp was all a blaze of light, and you could hear them all shouting. But I mean, there was nothing they could do, because it was all its ammunition, God knows how many gallons of aviation fuel, and it was going like mad. And the next thing we heard was shouts for help and whistles blowing. So we came downstairs, and after a bit, this lady, Dolly Gibson, appeared at the door with an airman. He'd lost his flying boot in the lake. He'd broken his shoulder blades with the jerk of the parachute, and she'd brought him up to the farm. And my mother lit the fire in the triplex grate. My father offered him some whiskey, and he said he didn't drink. And so we made him a cup of tea. And then, without any further ado, another one walked in. He was about the most glamorous young man I've ever seen. He'd got his parachute under his arm like a Mac. He'd just got his uniform, jacket and collar and tie, but he'd got his flying boots on. He didn't say a word to anybody, and he drank the whiskey, which was still on the kitchen table. And he says, "God, I'm glad to be back." He said, I came down safely by parachute, and then I realised I was in a herd of cows. And he says, I thought the next thing's going to be the bull's going to kill me, and I shall come back to earth safely and then be killed by a bull. Anyway, the bull was not out with the cows, and he walked in. In due course, the ambulance did come, and it took them to what we now think of the Moorlands Hospital in Leek. We knew from them that there were 8 on the plane. Another one landed at Chetham's garage, and they took him in. And the 4th one landed behind Cliff Park on the birch trees land, and he went to Barnsley to Rogers's with parachute, and I believe they still have parachute. And as soon as it came sort of nearly daylight, I saddled the pony up and I went round the fields to see if there were any of the other 4 that were still alive and perhaps injured. But very sadly, the pilot bailed out too late, and his parachute didn't open, and he landed not far from the plane, and there was a hole about so deep where he'd hit the ground and sort of literally made a hole, the force of his body coming down. And the other 3 were burnt to death in the plane. During the war, film was terribly hard to get hold of, so nobody's got any photographic record of any of this, because you simply couldn't get film, which was a pity. There's a whole sort of gap in our lives of very few photographs.
We have a railway line which goes through right down the lakeside. And there's a bridge at Rudyard, a very nice stone railway bridge. And I don't think it's visible now, but there used to be, I think it was 8 holes under that railway bridge, let into the ground about 4 or 5 feet deep. And they were about 10 inches square. And what were available were rolled steel joists, RSJs, which were about 10 feet long. The idea was that if the worst came to the worst and we were being invaded, we'd slot these things into these holes, and it would prevent tanks from going under the bridge. See, that's true. All sorts of things like that went on. On the lake, there were cables slung across the lake, 2 lots of cables across the lake, and there were also rolls of chestnut fencing. But these things just floated just about above the surface, and they rolled them into the lake and held them in position with cables of some sort. The idea was that any float planes which came in, should there be an invasion, would crash or be, destroyed. Also, all these things went on.
I'm a local farmer. I live at Dams Lane Farm in Grattan. I'm also quite associated with Horton Church, Mina Balringer and Church Warden. Before the mains water supply was connected to houses in Horton Parish, villagers carried or pumped water from springs and wells. Children of the parish aged from 5 to 11 years attended Church of England's School of St Michael's. Every day, Mrs Bailey, the headmistress, would send 2 of the oldest boys to fetch drinking water from a spring at Bond House Farm, Horton. Rainwater was collected in a large underground tank, which was pumped with a rotary hand pump fastened to the kitchen wall. This provided water for washing dishes and general cleaning. A neighbouring farmer with his horse and trap supplied 2 milk churns of clean water for cooking purposes.
I am Pam Gilman. I was born in Badley Green, Pam Gilman, which I've reverted to my maiden name now. And then when I was 17, I met my first husband and came to live in Rudyard, 1948. I suppose the first memory I have from Rudyard was when I lived at Rest Cottage and went to the loo and there was no chain to put down. Oh, and I thought, oh, I say, how posh, it must flush automatically. I didn't know there was places without flush toilets and taps and what have you, you know, sort of thing. And we used to drag this horrible old tin bath in on Friday night and fill it with hot water out of the boiler for a bath. I mean, I'd never known that there was no baths, you know, which was terrible.
During the early 1950s, a large covered reservoir was built at Fairview, Rudyard, which at that time was a small farm and now the site of the John Munro Private Hospital. This reservoir and also a water tower at School Lane, Longston, was supplied by pump water from a borehole at Pool End on the Macclesfield Road, Rudyard. This provided Horton parishioners with clean drinking water, which was very beneficial to their health.
Anyway, and then I lived in Hawthorne Cottage and we had to fetch the water in buckets from across the lane out of the stream. And then water was laid on. I wonder, it was blissful. And Mary bought herself a hose pipe. And she went berserk with this hose pipe over the yard, the steps, the path, the dog, everything, you know. But anyway, we'd got water, which was blissful.
Henry Boot and Sons were the contractors responsible for piping the main water supply in Horton Parish. Several standpipes were positioned in villages, one being at the Crescent, Rudyard, a new 12-house council housing estate. Another one was positioned near Horton Churchyard gates. Parishioners were so pleased not to have to carry water up the Hall Bank that they held a special service outside the church to bless the standpipe. Villagers choosing to obtain their water from the standpipe were not required to pay a water rate. However, the standpipes were eventually removed and householders had to connect to the mains and pay the water rates.
And of course I came to Elton, across here, with a bathroom and flush toilets. Oh, and it was bliss. And then I was a school dinner lady for a good many years up at Horton St Michael's. And I worked at the Lake Hotel. I was a waitress at the Lake Hotel, about 10 years, with Sandra Buxton, you know. And I mean, it was hard work, and there was times when I wasn't home till perhaps 1 o'clock in the morning.
In those days, you know, farmers were both arable and they used to produce milk. Nowadays it's mostly milk farming and beef farming. Very little land is ploughed up. But before the Second World War, lots of it was ploughed up. And during the war, of course, more was ploughed up to produce food so that we didn't have to bring it across the ocean, where the German U-boats were very active. So we made our own food. Everybody grew cabbages and carrots and heaven knows what all in the gardens everywhere. Tennis courts were cut up so that we could grow things.
Now in the village there were several people who I will remark. There was Mrs. Rogers, who kept the shop at the top of the bank. Mrs. Bailey had the post office, then her daughter Violet, who married Ernest Lees, and he was the postman. At the other end of the village was Mr. and Mrs. Stone. That was at the lake end. Mr. Bowyer and Sons. Mr. Bowyer was an undertaker and joiner. He was also our milkman, which was milk delivered by Harold, his son. Sidney worked at Oakermore or Frog Hall. We all used the train to go to work or school. Mrs. Blanche Salt, now she taught us to ballroom dance in the old tea room. That was great fun. I don't know if we ever were very good. The famous tea rooms with Mrs. Gilliard and the Coxon family. Mr. Aberley Grocer, Mr. Corden, who mended our shoes, Billy Aberley at the garage. I think on Fridays there came a butcher from Leek who rented a shop underneath Hollybank House. He sold his meat products and delivered. St. Gabriel's Church was built on a landfill site at the top of the hill above the village. Sadly, it had to be demolished after the war, as the land it was built on began to slip. The Reverend Wheeldon took the service every other Sunday evening, a lay preacher the other Sundays. There were only 2 baptisms recorded at St. Gabriel's. Before the church was demolished, owls used to nest in the bell tower, and quite terrifying noises used to be heard at night, hooting and breathing of baby owls, which sounded weird. We used to say they were ghosts. Now we go to Horton. As I lived in Rudyard village and took the only thing personally I recall is the church. A lovely old church. We used to go every Sunday morning when young and allowed to go in the evening as we grew older and able to go about on our own. It was famous and used specially for harvest, baptisms, confirmations, marriages and burials. It was all part of Horton village life. The Easter Communion and Christmas and the harvest festivals were the highlights of the year. The church for the harvest was beautifully decorated by all. The services, one Friday or Thursday and on the Sunday, and the second weekend in October. Then the harvest supper held at the school, which is now this village hall.
What we used to try to do used to be 2 oil lamps, one at either end of the church, and lamps and candles all over the place, but mainly oil lamp, because there's no electricity then, not in the church. And it was absolutely beautiful. That church was, oh, I don't know. I still think about it and it sends a thrill through me. But we used to touch the bottom oil lamp, which was on a huge long chain down from the roof of the church. We used to set it swinging so that it would just move just about a foot, see? And we knew where the stick was that could reach it, and nobody else could. But as long as it was swinging, it would swing all through the service, and it would swing for day after. Because the length of that pendulum, you know, we used to laugh at that.
I was born in December 1926 at Willgate Farm at Rudyard. My family had lived at this farm for a very long time. And I came to Horton School, as near as I can say, in the spring of 1934. I walked from Rudyard to Horton School every day and back again. No school buses then, no school dinners. You took your own sandwiches. Loved Horton School. Part of the journey was on road and part was through fields. And in the summer, I used to love to go over the stile into the fields, get my boots, had to have boots for walking in, that's something else, get my boots and socks off and walk through the fields collecting flowers.
Horton is the most peaceful place ever, and anyone who has visited, let alone live there, will testify to this. The Rudyard year started at Easter time. After the dark and usually cold winter, life began again in the village. Most of the houses along Lake Road put up their signs, teased with Hovis, and as the then LMS railway ran from Stoke to Manchester, very many visitors got off at Rudyard station and visited the lake. The Easter fair came into the hotel yard. Roundabouts, chairplanes, toffee and rock stalls, and all the things that accompany a travelling fair. Great fun and lovely loud music blared out from the steam organ. The boats that had been put away for the winter were brought out, cleaned, repainted and checked for safety, and were ready to be hired out to the visitors. Mr. Hall's boathouse was the predominant one. He had a steam cruiser to take passengers to the top of the lake and back. I remember a violinist used to play during the trip for the pleasure or otherwise of the customers. Mr. Charlie Young was in charge of the boats. Mr. Brake sold balloons, took flashlight photographs, and the centrephone played music, excerpts from the desert song Choo Chin Chow and many others which were popular at that time. And there was dancing on the boards, very sophisticated. The lakeside stalls were reopened for souvenirs, rock, ice cream and sweets. The last train back to Stoke was, I think, around 9 p.m. Rudyard had awakened for the season, which apart from the fair with the roundabouts carried on until August.
I remember the people who used to have holidays then very often only had a day's holiday or 2 days. They would get the August Bank Holiday Monday and Good Friday and Easter Monday, and these sort of days were given to them. And these people, as many as 20,000 a day, used to come into Rudyard. Trains used to come into Rudyard station with 14 coaches on, and they had to go into the station at 2 jumps because the station platform wasn't long enough. And people used to have to wait, and they used to have to unload this concourse. This huge number of people used to stream off the station platform and walk into the village, where the bobby used to stand at the top of the hill and direct people to where the lake was and what was going on. These were strange times, really, when you think about it, because, well, it's strange to me, but these people, there were thousands of them, and they used to sit around the lake and enjoy cups of tea and little, the sheds, really, black and white sheds, which had postcards and all sorts of things that they used to sell.
As the year progressed, fewer visitors came, and it was harvest festival time. The harvest tea and chapel concerts, the fruit and vegetables, which were donated to decorate the chapel, were auctioned off, the money going to the chapel fund. Then the boats were put away for the winter, and it was all left until next year when it began again.
Anyway, I remember most of all about the village was the life in the village at that time. We'd about 4 cafes, 3 shops, post office, 2 very lively hotels. I remember the station hotel very well. I remember one Christmas, you know, there was no television in them days, about 1948 or 9. And me and my friend Reg, we'd nothing to do, so we thought we'll go down to the station, and it were packed out. We didn't know where to go in, because P.C. Palmer was policeman then, and, you know, underage, you never went in pubs. But Mary and Stan Hudson come along, and we says, Mary, just have a look if Palmer's in. And she looked in, hey, you're all right, lads, come in. And we went in, and it was packed with all the locals on a Christmas night having a wonderful time.
The days became shorter and colder. Rehearsals were started for the Boxing Day pantomime. Nearly everyone in the village took part. It was great fun. If you forgot your words, you made it up, hoping the rest of the cast would cotton on, and so they did, and we would get back to the script. Who wrote it, I have no idea. After Christmas Day, Boxing Day dawned, and the excitement began. The ladies of the village prepared the tea, because all for 2 and 3pence we had a tea, a pantomime and a dance. The tea was cleared away afterwards, chairs put out for the audience, and it all went with a swing. And after the pantomime, the floor was cleared for the dance. The room was full to start with, but after 10 o'clock, when the local hostelry closed, the revellers came across to the dance room. A band was hired from Leek and the dancing began, finishing with God Save the King at around 1 a.m.
You see, we have to have the dances and pantomimes, concerts at the Institute. It was wonderful. The Saturday night dances were a terrific thing. And Miss Davies, that kept the Lake Hotel at that time in the late 40s, she used to sit knitting, waiting for the interval, so that we could, you know, go down and spend a bit of money. And I remember I used to be in the pantomimes. I was in the pantomimes from when I was about 10 years old to when they finished, when I was near 30. But I'll never forget, you talk of Morecambe and Wise, we'd got his own Morecambe and Wise in Travis Sandy and Hildred Salt, because they were a terrific comedy turn, really natural comics. And there was a lot of local talent in Rudyard. You know, we used to have the pantomime was all local chorus girls, and they used to get 400 on a boxing night, absolutely packed out. And Pam's late father-in-law, Horace Beckford, he painted some wonderful scenes of castles and gardens and, you know, at the back. And then we had a Rudyard Dramatic Society, which is unbelievable. And we used to put plays as See How You Run, Thark, and all such things I've forgotten, but I was in that actually, and I used to thoroughly enjoy acting. And as I say, the dances, they used to put on a bus from Leek, and it was sixpence, a late bus at midnight, and it was fully, but you know, there were about 40 packing on this bus, but they were wonderful times at the Institute. But then
There was Hildred Salt, Travis Sandeman, Travis's sister May Winkle, Peggy Elks, and these four were the sort of nucleus of concerts, pantomime. Christmas pantomime was well known. People came from Manchester to see our pantomime. It was an absolute riot. And they were the real stars of it because they got it going, got it organised. And we got at the Institute, the Memorial Institute, which was the memorial from the First World War, and was quite something in its day. We got a decent stage and a very good up-to-date lighting system. Bear in mind, I'm talking about 1934 to through the war. Less in the war, because everybody had gone, all the lads had gone. But certainly up to about 1942, these pantos were quite something. And we got a very good lighting system. And there was a chap who did the lights called Jim Thompson. And he wore plimsolls and dilapidated flannels and a short-sleeved shirt. And he couldn't be bothered with any of us little kids who were fairies and chorus and stuff like that. We were beneath his notice totally. He was only interested in the stage and having it look right. And he moved so beautifully. He moved like a cat. I loved dancing. I loved movement and rhythm. And as a kid, I used to look at Jim Thompson and watch him move and think he was wonderful because you couldn't hear him and he just moved about so beautifully.
New Year brought fog, frost and snow and ice. We young ones loved the snow, and as it always seemed to be moonlight, night-time tobogganing was the thing. We used to go to Mountford's Field, which was ideal. It was bitter cold, we got wet through, but who cared anyway? One year, after many cold days and heavy snow and hoarfrost, the trees in the woodland up the top road were covered in glittering frost. The full moon lit it all up. I'm sure anyone who ever saw it just that night will never forget how magical it was.
I remember quite well, as a youngster with my brother Harry, setting off on our bicycles most weekends to spend an hour or two at Rudyard Lake. It is about 2 miles from where we lived at Longston. At that time there was a small fairground with derby horses, miniature railway and various other amusements. We sometimes went on the steamboat which was called the Rudyard Queen. It took us around the lake. We spent many happy times there. I think Rudyard Lake has a most beautiful setting with its lovely trees surrounding it on both sides. People going past on the Macclesfield Road have a most wonderful view of the lake.